Wanted to welcome everybody to this bi-weekly webinar. I'm Ryan Poole. I'm a co-host with Jim Brown. For people that don't know, I'm a real estate agent, been doing this over 20 years, like a lot of you here on this call. Love the real estate industry. I'm also the founder of RealTrade, which is an online marketplace and social media platform for real estate. I implore everybody to check that out. It's free. You can go to realtrade.io or to Google RealTrade, create a free profile, and start getting leads directly off your own listings and manage that. And you can also go connect with awesome service providers like Jim, like Jeff Stewart on this call that can help you close more deals and be more efficient. Happy to host this with Jim. You know, this has been a scary time, guys. I know a lot of you have been in real estate a long time too. And I tell you, the pace that the changes have been coming here in the last couple months has been so intense. You know, there's a lot of things going, obviously, with the NAR settlement, you know, them being sued, and then all the repercussions that have come through there, all the new forms. And we've been lucky enough to have an amazing real estate attorney here, Jim Brown here, that has kept up with this bi-weekly here, giving us updates in real time, what we need to do to, you know, work through these new laws, these new changes, these new forms. And this is a big one because we're actually going to be kind of summarizing all the changes that have happened here in the last few months. Some big things that Jim here can help us to be more efficient and make sure we're doing, you know, everything on the up and up. So Jim, you know, why don't you introduce yourself here to people that don't know you?
First, I want to say it's a privilege to be able to serve you guys. It's been my pleasure to learn this trade and now at my stage of my career, be able to pass it on and take some chances, right? Go out on a limb, give you my advice, give some opinions. And my goal here is to talk about stuff you won't hear anyplace else. That's my goal. Like you guys log in here, you're not going to get regurgitated stuff. We're going to talk about the things that are kind of like a little more risky to talk about. And I'm going to give you practice suggestions that I know the Florida Association of Realtors won't go on a limb and tell you. And so for that reason, I hope you guys find value. One of the things that we've been doing lately, and I commend anybody who showed up this time because I looked at last week's outline and the volume of stuff we covered last week was just ridiculous. I mean, the last several sessions, just the volume of forms changes. And so anybody who's showing up today, you're forward thinking, you're progressive, you want to be ahead of the ball, and for that reason, you're going to succeed. There's no dumb questions. I think we have it's been pretty good when people wanted to chime in mid-session. Don't hesitate.
Yeah.
You can put your questions in the chat section. Ryan, I'm on a small screen today. If you could.
Yeah, no, I'll get to the questions in the chat, and I'm letting everybody in as a bunch of people are filing in right now, Jim. So if you have any questions as we go, you can write them in the chat. You can raise your hand. We want to make this conversational as we can because, hey, we're all working through this. You know, this is some big changes. A lot of stuff's coming at us real fast, and, you know, we want to make sure that we're getting all our questions answered. And number two, that we can share, you know, that we can learn from each other.
Yeah, that's the real value here, Ryan, right? I always say iron sharpens iron. We sat as a team yesterday at the title office, and we started talking about one little element of the things that have happened over the last 4 or 5 months, one little piece. And we're going to do a deep dive on that today. And it started what, Tajay? 3-hour discussion, 3.5-hour discussion between people who look at everybody else's work. We couldn't come to consensus on some of these things. So I put a lot of thought into today. Instead of doing instead of doing a dozen different things, I'm going to mention a couple of things that I think are really valuable to you guys. And then we're going to do a deep dive on something that I think we can all get ahead of the curve on. You can always text me 24/7. If you go to newpathtitle.com, you'll see 24/7 attorney support. And then at the end of the show, we're going to do some time-saving tips. I'm getting nervous. I keep seeing people show up. We're going to do some time-saving tips for agents. All right, Ryan, you want to go into anything further?
No, I just put in New Path Title's website in the chat so you can check that out. Like Jim said, you have 24/7. You can check out a lot of time-saving tools too that Jim will be go over. And of course, you have RealTrade as well. You can get free leads, get connected with the awesome service provider. We have thousands of buyers and sellers. We're going to be doing a new advertising push for more buyers and sellers to bring them on the platform. We're really excited about that. So we got some new developments too, Jim, for buyers and sellers. That's going to bring us even more. So we're excited.
Nice.
Let's get the ball rolling.
All right. So are you guys, Ryan, are you seeing the screen share?
Yep, I can see it side by side there with the new outline. And then also the compensation agreement, owner listing broker to tenants broker.
All right, sounds great. I'm not seeing you guys, so if Ryan, you can clue me in. If people are having a hard time, that'd be great.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so let's see. How can I move this toolbar? Oy vey. All right, so it's October 2022, 2024. The Florida Realtors have modified or created almost 24 new forms in the past 4 months, and I've just found another one today as I was preparing for this session. I've been in real estate 40 years. There's a lot of change. Don't let anybody tell you differently. The reality is, however, we're never going back. And if you're just coming into the business, this is the way it's going to be done moving forward. So we all got to embrace it. You know, embrace the suck. It's what I tell my kid all the time. She's in medical school. I say, embrace the suck. It's just the way it's going to be. Agents have to check on the law and the rule changes frequently. The reality is that a little bit better?
Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. That's good. Yep. There we go.
All right. Agents have to check on the law and the rules frequently. Uncoupling is coming. I'm going to go out on a limb. It's coming for sure. And let's prepare now. In the last 6 sessions, we've covered too much material. Today, we're going to drill down deeper on just a couple of topics. Let's look at where we came from, and then we'll talk about where we're going to go. March 24th, we had the class action judgment, granted preliminary approval to the proposed settlement.
Hello?
It's almost a year ago, hard to believe. August 17th, we went into the practice changes. That seems like forever ago. And now we're already doing this stuff. November 26th, though, we still have the final hearing for the approval on the order of imposing the changes. So the thing I want to stress here is that there was no judge that said we had to do what we're doing now. These are
Right.
self-imposed changes by an industry. The industry decided it was better to settle than fight from an industry perspective. It's not an admission of guilt. If anybody talks to you about, if you hear your clients say, well, but the realtors were guilty, that's not the case. The association decided it was better to settle than to continue fighting from a financial perspective and from an industry perspective. Where are we going? Appeals are going to drag this thing out. It's just the reality. It's going to be drug out for a long time to come. I still expect that November 26th, we're going to have a final settlement, but that will be appealed. The Morrell case is set to go to trial in the spring of 2025. The potential damages are even bigger than Sitzer. Attorneys in the Sitzer NAR case made a ton of money. A ton of money. If you see, we went over it briefly, some of the damage claims. The dollar values for some of their hourly amounts are stupid. And I think the highest paid attorney was $3,500 an hour. There was attorneys that were claiming over $2,500 an
Are you
hour.
kidding me? This is so much.
No, straight up. And I heard a really good analysis, that same group of lawyers that were talking about the property rights claims in North Carolina with all the properties being damaged and the obscured boundary lines. They were talking in depth about the settlement and how unfortunate it was. And these are attorneys criticizing attorneys. These weren't real estate agents criticizing attorneys. These were attorneys criticizing attorneys. And the summary of the discussion was a huge fat financial settlement wasn't necessary, that the changes to the industry that are going on, and we're going to talk about it more, uncoupling and privity. Those are the 2 big things I've been mentioning from the start, and I hear more and more discussions between brokerage attorneys at the senior level, and they're talking about uncoupling and privity. But basically in the podcast, they were talking about how unfortunate it was, how expensive to the industry it was, and what a black eye to the industry it was. And these are attorneys criticizing attorneys. You don't see that. So unfortunately, there are a lot of eyes on Florida. Florida now has more real estate agents than any other U.S. state, including California. I don't know if you guys were aware of that, but researching for the podcast, that came up in the research, and I was a little blown away. Florida tort reform through House Bill 837 has motivated some of the state's biggest injury law firms to go into the real estate commission lawsuit space. It's happening. I read a list of the plaintiffs' lawyers that are still doing personal injury work, that are transitioning into, and there's a couple of big lawsuits in Miami, commission commission reform work or commission lawsuit work. It's not over. I don't like the motivation through fear, but we have to be very careful on how we do business. Most importantly, and we can do this, it's not a stretch, but we have to use our collective thinking power and think critically. And that's the value of this session, right? The things that I talked about with my staff yesterday, had I not sat with staff and had I not gamed this stuff out with a little team, there is no way I could come to the conclusions I came with solo. I don't expect any agent that's practicing today can have all the answers practicing solo. And the majority of brokers I hear advising their agents are not giving advice that's consistent with, and I'm not talking about the industry brokers, I'm just talking about the local brokerages, and I'm not trying to sound critical, I'm just saying that the information's changing so quickly, the advice I hear brokers giving their agents is somewhat inconsistent with the latest industry trends that I'm happy to come and educate the brokerages in more detail, but it's more important now than ever to really stay on top of your game. I plan on doing a forum summary today, like Ryan talked about. However, after meeting with staff, we got to do something that's a little deeper on a topic that I think potentially can create a lot of problems and requires a deeper dive and thorough explanation. Before we get there, I want to go over a few things. When agents are sitting with their clients, I'm hearing all kinds of statements about the rules, and I get calls from buyers and sellers all the time, and they say, what are the new rules? And so we brainstormed for a little while yesterday, and we thought of a way to explain the new rules when your buyers or sellers ask you, what are the rules? And so here's a simple soundbite that you guys can copy and use if you want to use it. The rules on commissions have not changed since 1908. The new rules address how transactions are presented. And the two big changes are buyer's agent commissions can no longer be shown in the MLS, and buyer's agents must get buyer's agency agreements. That's the easiest way that we've come up with explaining it. I've heard agents go down the rabbit hole and talk about settlements and lawsuits and things like that. You don't need to entertain those discussions. You could also ask, what do you know about this, before you explain to them what you know, but I think the conversation has been made way too complicated by the media, and agents have made way too much of it in their explanations.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any comments on that, Ryan? I mean,
we just had one question from Alex here. Jim, just a little bit prior here, could you please go a little bit deeper into how attorneys, like these class action attorneys, are looking for in commission suits? Like, what are they looking for?
Improprieties, conflicts of interest, putting the interests of the agent ahead of the needs of the buyers and sellers. I would say a broad statement of steering, but that all falls into the category of agents putting their needs ahead to get commissions of the buyer's desire to find a property and the seller's desire to sell a property. So we'll go over.
He makes a good point. So how can they sue in the rules? Because they haven't, they haven't literally, like, the suit isn't finished, right? Because there's been no, there's been no, settle. I mean, there hasn't been, like, the settlement hasn't been finalized. So, how can they sue if the rules aren't legally binding yet?
So the first lawsuit was the Sitzer NAR settlement. That's the ruling that's coming out November 27 of this year.
Yeah.
There are additional lawsuits that'll further refine the rules. The Department of Justice is still examining the rules, and the rules on impropriety have existed forever. The rules on steering, agents putting their needs ahead of the needs of the buyers and sellers, those are general agency principle rules. Those have existed forever.
Okay. So they'll just basically try to go after the rules that are already in place, and as the rules change, then of course they're gonna work those angles too to make a buck.
And if you've noticed, the Florida bar, all the new Florida bar forms have at the very bottom of the form a statement that this form is not legally binding, and it's not subject. It's subject to legal interpretation. I mean, the Florida Association of Realtors knows very well these issues are not settled. These are going to be ongoing issues, and so they're disclaiming their role in it. And they've given you guys a ton of forms that I think we can dramatically simplify, and we'll do that in a future episode. But I think this one particular topic requires drilling down, and when we talk about it more, I think your answer will be more clearly, your question will be more clearly answered.
Awesome.
So we've made a closing cost calculator. This is from a practice perspective. We made a closing cost calculator, which helps with today's deals. Buyers and sellers have a hard time wrapping their head around the impact of commissions on the global deal. NewPathTitle.com now has inputs for seller concessions and buyer agent costs, and you can use this when you sit with your listing client. You can use it when you sit with your buying client. We have a ton of agents that are calling us and saying, hey, can you prepare this and can you prepare that? The reality is you're going to go to the meeting and they're going to have questions that you didn't anticipate. And so if you get used to using the tool, it's going to give you guys a lot of help. So you go to newpathtitle.com. You click at the very top of the page on the calculator symbol from your phone or from a PC. It's going to give you a couple of different options. You select the seller's option. We still got to make a couple of tweaks to the buyer's option. This stuff just takes a long time. You choose a purchase price. I mean, you can key in your own purchase price. I've been testing it, so the purchase prices were in there. This stuff all defaults to percentages. So you type in the commission that you're going to pay your agent. You type in the commission that you're going to pay the buyer's agent. So if you're sitting with the selling agent right now, this is the form you'd use. You put in your transaction fee if one exists. And then you also have the additional input now of a seller's concession to buyer. You can type it in either a percentage or a dollar amount, as you can with all the rest of them. There's more boxes here than ever, but at the end of the day, it gives you a real opportunity to see all the different values and how it affects the transaction. And listen, if it's confusing for us, could you imagine being a buyer or seller who does this once every 3 to 5 years? There's a careful balance between information overload and what you give somebody to make a decision on. And we've tried to strike that balance. We've actually taken some of the functionality off of the tool, and we've included some functionality that's more consistent with today's transactions, and finding that balance is not easy. It's not easy at all. Is this property in a homeowners association? Who's paying for title insurance? We'll just click yes. The seller, because it's Palm Beach County, although that's by rule, not by law. Is the property in Miami-Dade? No. So then you can click go, and you're going to get the purchase price. You're going to get the first mortgage payoff, the second mortgage payoff, the settlement fee, the title search fee, all the different fees that go into it. And then you're going to get a summary of the seller's total estimated proceeds and then the seller's total estimated closing costs. We're going to add another box in there that I think will be for just the commissions. So we'll break the commissions out of the seller's cost to close. So we'll have 2 lines. It'll have a closing cost summary and it'll have a commission summary. And if you guys have anything that you think is valuable, text us and let us know, and text me and let me know, and we'll include it in there. Or let Tajay know and Christian, and we'll
We got a couple quick questions. I know we're moving through this. Maybe go back to the outline, Jim. But Federico says, are we going to be paying the settlement and lawsuit costs as increased NAR membership fees? May we expect they have air and emissions insurance or similar? I mean, it's my understanding that your broker, right, you have to buy airs and emission insurance separately from your NAR fees. That's my take
Oh
on
yeah,
that.
everybody should have their own professional liability policy. If you don't have it, your broker should have it. Not everybody should have it. Your broker should have it.
Yeah.
And you should be covered. We can definitely do a deeper dive on that whole topic, but I've heard lots of discussions both ways. But the reality is, if you're included in the NAR settlement, which only a couple of brokerages aren't, then individual agents should not have liability. Individual brokerages at the franchise level should not have liability.
Mm-hmm. As far as the fees, I know for the beaches MLS is mandatory. You have to join NAR, right? And from my understanding, those fees did increase this year, including the NAR fees and all the other fees. So, I'm sure, things will get passed down, right? I mean, which that's a whole nother conversation about NAR and having to be mandatory members to be on the MLS and different things like that. But Alex had a quick question. When you read these newer documents, buyers or sellers are now called consumers. This is beyond confusion. Confusion. What's your take on that, Jim? What's your take on that?
When we first started this thing, I just want to show quickly before we get off the topic, there's a buyer's side too, which has the purchase price, the loan amount, the realtor transaction fee, the buyer's realtor fee, and then a seller's concession. So when you plug in all those numbers, you can see the effect of seller's concessions when you're structuring your BBAs. I haven't seen any other title agents or providing tools like this to you guys. I hope you find it valuable. Again, if you have any inputs, just text me and we'll make the changes. Getting back to that.
I mean, they can use
There's a whole ton of laws. I don't mean to interrupt, Ryan, but there's a whole ton of laws over form over function, right? And what you call something is irrelevant at the end of the day if the function is the same, right? So if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's a duck, even if you don't call it a duck. Initially, there were a lot of discussions about how to call. I heard lectures from the Florida Association of Realtors where they said we're never going to talk about buyer's compensation again. It's always going to be concessions. And now the Florida Association of Realtors is making videos where they're specifically referring to buyer's compensation, buyer's agent compensation. So it's incredibly confusing. I don't see any problems with not using those terms from a liability perspective. Again, I'm going out on a limb. I don't think you're going to get testers that are going to test you on whether you called something buyers, agents, compensation, parties, consumers. I don't think that's where you're opening yourself up to liability, if that's the question.
All right, thanks, Jim. All right, let's see. We're getting in the meat of the webinar here, Jim. So
all right, I've noticed that our sessions have been running a lot longer than I wanted. So this one, I'm going to keep short and tight, but we're going to go deep on something and there's going to be questions. And I want this to be more like a question and answer where I'm going to throw you out some ideas, but I want to get some feedback from you guys. So I had new forms roundup for today. We talked about that. We're going to go deeper on something. The offers we've been seeing coming to us. We reviewed the contracts, we talked as a group, and what we're seeing coming to us are coming in 3 basic groups. Paragraph 20 has become the go-to for buyer's compensation. Initially, months ago, I heard brokers lecturing their agents saying, do not put compensation in paragraph 20. Here we are a few months later, and now this has become the norm. So that's how quickly these things are changing. You can go to YouTube and you can find the videos with some big Florida brokers telling their agents how to conduct transactions. And they explicitly say with their attorneys in the videos, don't put compensation. Now we've all agreed as an industry and everybody's putting compensation in paragraph 20. That's how it should be. This is a good thing to keep it all in one place and keep it as simple as possible. I also believe the contract form may be amended at some point soon. I'm sorry, guys, I have a little sore throat.
yeah.
And we're going to see these transactions disclosed in the contract. And there's some real reasons that I'll go over shortly why that's going to occur.
And can you show us too? We got a quick question from Jerry about show us in paragraph. They wanted to see where in paragraph 20 on the contract where to write it in and all that kind of good stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
Got this crazy toolbar at the top I can't seem to escape that keeps popping down. So here you're going to select the form, you're going to go to the far bar, as is. Paragraph 20 is the paragraph where we're allowed to add additional terms. And I can't find any history of it. Well, anyway, so here's the paragraph 20. This is the additional terms. This keeps everything in one place. I think compensation offers in the additional terms is a great thing to do. Here you have the addenda paragraph that we went over last week. They snuck in FF and GG for about a 2 or 3 week period, and then they took out addendas FF and GG, which were pertaining to compensations. which is a whole nother discussion, and we're going to dramatically simplify today. But make a note, these things are changing, and they're not, see this revised 824? There was no revision 0.1 and 0.2 and 0.3. They're taking stuff out and putting stuff in and not adding revision provisions to the revision statement. That's a lot of revisions in one sentence. All right, always keep that uncoupling theme in the back of your mind. Parties pay agents, agents don't pay agents. Buyers and sellers pay agents, agents don't pay agents. That uncoupling thing is going to be really important as we move through this next section. Always keep the concept of privity in the back of your mind. Rights of a contract exist only to the people who signed the contract. So we've got a couple of different contracts working in harmony here, right? We've got compensation agreements, which are between, I want to tell you, only sellers and buyers agents. And then we've got contracts, which are between buyers and sellers. And at the very bottom of the Florida form, we took away the percentages and the way we used to do it in the as-is form. Remember, not long ago, this form had agents and percentages, right? Now it just says agent.
Yep.
It doesn't get into percentages. Why? Because buyers and sellers can always change what they agree to pay the agents, and that doesn't affect the contract between the agents. So there's an inherent disconnect there, and there's a reason why I'm drilling down so deep on this concept. In a second, you'll see. Uncoupling and privity are the two big things that will keep agents out of trouble moving forward. What is privity? Privity is the rights of parties who sign agreements and the effect that it has or doesn't have on third parties. And uncoupling is the concept that sellers are paying buyers agents and buyers are paying buyers agents, but agents are never paying agents.
Yep. We got questions coming in here in real time, Jim. Maybe that's good. We got a lot of questions coming in.
All right.
Ron had a question here. On the MLS, there's a yes or no box for seller concessions. If the seller agrees on the listing agreement to pay the buyer's agent commission either directly or through the listing broker, is that considered seller concession for purposes on the MLS box?
The MLS concession is a broad statement that the seller is going to pay the buying side some money, the buyer some money. How the buying side uses that money is up to the buying side. There was a lot of creative agents early in this revolution that were putting like 3 cookies on the counter in their videos and 3 pillows on the couch and making videos and alluding to like that represented the commissions. That has nothing to do with what's going on today. Don't do it. Agents have already gotten penalized for it. When you guys put a concession in the MLS, that's a broad statement that the seller is willing to pay the buyer some money, and how the buyer uses it is up to them.
All right, a couple of other quick ones here. Couldn't you just click on the other box on the contract and include the compensation addendum there too? And then it'd be attached to the contract. Would that suffice?
We're going to go over we're going to go over in a second why that's not a great idea.
Okay.
But
Get
yes,
into that.
we're going to drill. That's the deepest thing we're going to drill down on in the next 10 minutes.
Awesome. All right.
What's the next thing? Is there any
Brian Pruitt had a question. I have also seen it added to seller's costs, page 4, line 197. Is that appropriate?
That's the danger of doing live shows.
Yeah.
I have not seen that. I don't think that's inappropriate, but I can tell you a better way to do it.
All right. So let's get,
we're all making, I think that the consensus is we're making references to a compensation agreement. And I'm going to go over in a minute why basing your contract on a compensation agreement is not a good idea.
Okay, let's do it.
That's the deepest part of what we're talking about today.
This is so awesome. I mean, no one's doing this. You're not hearing this.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Ryan. I'm really taking a risk here, right?
I know you are.
But I wholeheartedly believe in everything I'm telling you, and I base my practice on educating you guys, and I know these are the fundamentals that are going to be the pillars of the way we do business moving forward. I'm not telling you I'm a genius. I'm just saying, tip in the hat, this is the direction we're going in, and we can all get ahead of the curve and avoid problems if we do a few simple things. But they're based on the concepts I keep coming back to, privity and uncoupling. All right, here are the ways we see contracts coming in. blank on the commission section. So this is paragraph 20. They're blank on the commission section, and the agents are negotiating the compensations outside the contract. We'll go over why that's good or bad in a second. The second way we see contracts coming in is they say something like the seller will sign a buyer's agent's compensation agreement. It's something to that effect. And that's the majority of the ways Brian and the other people who just commented were talking about conducting their transactions, I believe. We also see the third way we see them coming in is it says something like the parties will agree to a certain rate of buyer's compensation right in the contract. I like 3 the best, and here's why. Number 1, I call it the blank 20. These are just some names I made up. Number 1, I call the blank 20. It provides too much back and forth that can be eliminated at the onset. The Florida Association of Realtors even created a form for this. I don't really like the form. It just encourages more back and forth. And why not knock this stuff out of the park? I mean, I could go on, but long story short, I think there are better ways for us to do business and save time far more efficiently. Number 2, this is the one we're going to really drill down on in this session. Why I didn't go into going over all the forms, why I think agents have to really hone their craft, but this is not a stretch. This is not a big deal. This is nothing out of the ordinary. Unwrap your head aroundable. This is easy stuff to do. Number 2, I call the compensation agreement 20. This is where, as Brian said, on the seller's expense side of the contract, or in paragraph 20, agents are writing something like they're going to put the compensation agreement is going to be signed, and we'll go over an example of why that's a problem. And it just has this vague statement. I'll write something in there before I publish the outline of what we're seeing, like the parties agree to sign a compensation agreement. It inherently creates a disconnect and runs afoul of the concept of privity and can lead to a train wreck if poorly administered or explained. And here's why. Buyers and sellers sign contracts. However, sellers and buyers, agents sign compensation agreements. Full stop. There's so many complications that can arise from this. I'll give you an example. We had a deal where paragraph 20 said the contract was contingent on seller signing the compensation agreement, and that's a paraphrase statement. And the compensation agreement said 3%. The seller struck the 3% and wrote in 2% and signed the contract and initialed the compensation agreement. Buyers don't sign or acknowledge compensation agreements. And in this transaction, the buyer did not sign or initial the contract after the seller's changed to the compensation agreement because everyone thought there was a contract. You guys, there is such a disconnect on interpretations of what I just told you between people who are fully schooled. Could you imagine buyers and sellers trying to wrap their heads around this, where they only do these deals once every 3 to 5 years? It's not going to happen. The deal came to us for closing, just like I told you. So to recap, there was a contract signed by buyer and seller, and there was a compensation agreement that said a 3 offered by the buyer, and the seller struck the 3 and wrote in the 2 and initialed it. But the buyer never saw it and possibly never acknowledged it. Ryan, is there a show of hands or anybody shaking their head or any comments in the?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all just. I mean, these things get so so complicated. Especially, that's why I said like let's go over the simplest way to do this. You know what I mean?
Okay, so here's my question, and I want everybody to say a show of hands. Did a contract exist based on the facts I just told you? Did a contract exist based on the facts I just told you?
Yes. My understanding, no.
I would say no.
Yeah.
But everybody went to closing and nobody had a problem. And it's like a red light. If there are no cars in the intersection when the light turns red, there's never going to be an accident. But we all know if you run a red light long enough, there's going to be a major problem. And this is a major problem headed for a train wreck. We'd all agree if the seller's financing rider. All right, so now frame this thing in a way that we can all wrap our heads around. If this was a seller's financing deal, right, where the seller was giving a mortgage, and in paragraph 20, you said that the buyer wanted to get 8% interest and the seller countered and offered 10%. We'd all say there was no contract, right?
Correct.
It's the same thing that just happened here.
Right.
We'd all agree the term in the paragraph 20 would stand out as a counteroffer. But the problem here is the buyer doesn't sign the compensation agreement. And we've made it a material term of the contract by saying simply, not calling out a compensation. We just said, in this one, it says, it's contingent on the seller signing the compensation agreement. That's what was in the contract. And we'd all agree, let's see, why make a form that the buyer and seller are not signing a part of the contract? And this is the example that comes to mind. This is like signing a contract to paint your house. And the contract says it's subject to an agreement with a paint supplier at a stipulated price. But the paint supplier can change the paint price in the contract without the homeowner's consent or potential knowledge. You would never do that. You would never do that. What would you do? You would never do that, so I would recommend you never have your clients do this. This is the kind of thing that I think future plaintiffs' lawyers will sink their teeth into and claim that there's a problem. And certainly, forget about any lawsuits. Forget I even made that statement. There is a potential, and I'll go over in a minute, why this could derail your deals and cause unnecessary hardship. Wouldn't you put the paint price in the contract? The easy answer is, if you're getting a contract to paint your house and the contractor says, I'm going to charge you 10 grand, but you got to pay for materials, wouldn't you put $2,000 in your contract for materials? The answer is yes. So that's how you should do your contracts. And everybody signs that agreement. You're not having the paint supplier make a separate agreement that's now becoming part of your contract that the paint supplier can change, and it has a material financial impact on you. Here's the problems. Did the buyer actually know they were spending more money? The buyer never initialed, in that example I gave you, the compensation agreement. What if the transaction coordinator for the seller side failed to send the compensation agreement to the buyer, or was slow to present it, like maybe even after the inspection period? Times are tight. You're negotiating this deal. And now you've got this transaction coordinator that goes, oh, I forgot to circulate the compensation agreement. And now it comes in the day after the inspection period, and the buyer's like, what are you kidding me? I had no idea. It wasn't in the contract. Did the buyer see the contract? Yes. Did they see the compensation agreement? Potentially, no. What's up, Ryan?
No, it's good, Jim. I mean, we got questions coming, but you're getting to them. Brian,
All right.
Brian has a question here. Brian, you want to?
Well, but then it goes into, to throw another wrench into it. Shouldn't they, before they put the key in the door, have had an buyer broker agreement stating that they would pay something? So whether it was 2%, 10%, whatever, if there's a disparity, the buyer has already, in essence, assigned to, committed to pay an agent a certain amount. I mean, I'm all for, yeah.
I agree, but I don't disagree with what you're saying one little bit. But what I'm saying is, a buyer that signs a contract and has knowledge of this 3%, we'll go back to my example, this 3% burden being borne by the seller, but now the seller changing it to 2%, and the potential existing for the buyer not being aware of the change is the problem. Yes, legally, is the buyer obligated for the 2%, for the 1%, the difference? Yes. But how hard do you want to have that discussion the day on the eve of closing? What I'm suggesting to you guys is not that the Florida Association of Realtors hasn't done a terrible job of presenting you all the options. I mean, we went over 2 new forms the last time we met that are totally on this topic. Additional forms. I'm telling you though that there's a better way, a simpler way, a more clearer way for us to do business where we're not going to have potential problems down the road. And I can think of a bunch of examples, and we brainstormed out a ton yesterday that literally it's a rabbit hole. We spent 3 hours on what I thought would be a 20-minute discussion. All right, so what if now this goes to your point, or the point I was trying to make. What if the buyer's first acknowledgement of the change was a draft settlement statement the day before closing? Who wants to have that discussion the day before closing? Who wants to explain this on the buy or sell side? Because although it's a buyer expense, there will be backlash, and they're going to be getting the seller's agent roped in. And so this is a very important point. And Brian, I know I've made this over and over with your group, but I want to say it in this group. We have to do both sides of the job, right? If we're doing condo deals and we're representing the seller, we have to anticipate that the buyer is going to ask all those milestone inspections. We got to know all that stuff in the budgeting. We got to know all that stuff ahead of time. Yeah, is the burden on the buyer to go out and dig that stuff up, but we got to know that stuff ahead of time because we're just going to get to the closing table with that much less heartburn. Oh yeah, and here's a biggie, the buyer's comp agreement, right? So the buyer's compensation agreement does not have a provision that says that only the commission is due if it closes. What if the buyer cancels during the inspections period? And this is also a problem with the BBA and the showing agreements. Like, I'm not saying these forms are ill-conceived. I'm telling you, though, that everybody is moving at a high rate of speed and doing things, and we just haven't seen all the repercussions of the possible permutations. So what I'm giving you is the simplest way to do business and avoid these potential pitfalls. Because if you read the compensation agreement, let's pull it up for a second.
Alta, right there. There you go.
Select form. Listing agreements and disclosures, seller to buyer's broker. Here's the one I want you to use. This commission agreement, compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker. That's the only one we should be in my opinion. And so here you're going to see that all it says is if the buyer's broker is the procuring cause of the sale of the property during the term, seller will compensate the buyer's broker as stated below. There's no statement in there that it's going to be at the closing. Now, is that a nuance that we will gloss over 4 million times and never have a problem? Yes. But is there some attorney that'll seize on that and create problems for us if a closing doesn't happen and they're demanding commissions? I'm just saying it's out there. And if you look at the showing agreement and the BBA, the last time I saw them, not the showing agreement, yeah, the showing agreement, not the touring agreement, there was no provision, there was no qualifier in there for when compensation was due. If they cancel during the inspection periods, same problem arises. I'm not throwing Florida Association of Realtors under the bus. I'm just saying we are traveling at a very high rate of speed to tackle all this information and to put this stuff into practice. And although I'm telling you the dust is settling, it's not settled. The FAR bar, Ryan, how far does the FAR bar go back? 20, 30 years? I should know this off the top of my head, but it's gone through so many iterations. Why? As soon as we see a problem, they modify the form. We do the same thing at my office. Number 3, this is the third way we see the stuff come in. I'll call this the commission 20. This is where they stipulate the commission number in the contract. The language for this provision that I like best is this. In paragraph 20 of the contract, you write, this contract is contingent on seller paying buyer's agent 3% of the purchase price at closing and seller signing a compensation agreement with the same values. With the same value. Now, what have you done there? You have done everything that needs to be done with regard to buyer's compensation, closing or not closing. More importantly, you've put the needs of the buyer at the same pace as the needs of the agent. There could be no conflicts. and you've set forth all the material terms between the buyer, the seller, and the agent in one document, and you've tied it into the signing of a compensation agreement. With one sentence, you've simplified your life dramatically.
So what? So this is a little different. So you don't want to say seller side. You're saying now use the seller paying buyer's agent 3% of the purchase price at closing, and seller signing a compensation agreement. What if it goes back to where the listing agent, checked off that they'll be paying the.
You can have that discussion.
Okay.
But and you can do it. This is the way I would suggest you tender the deal.
Yeah.
Everything in a deal is negotiable. And I won't tell you to not do the deal if they insist the commission is coming from the seller's agent. But what I will tell you is it's inconsistent with the concept of uncoupling. And if you listen to the higher ups talk about the future of real estate, it's all about uncoupling. So again, don't not do the deal. Negotiate the deal. Use the proper compensation form. And if the seller insists that the seller's agent has to pay the buyer's agent, great. Use the right form and do the deal. But start your deals. My suggestion to you guys is you start every deal vanilla, and then you work into other flavors if they come up. Obviously, use whatever commission number you want. You're going to hear all the attorneys from the Florida Association of Realtors. Whenever they educate you guys, they always talk about, fictitious things, bananas and apples, and they never talk about commission points. I use commission points because it's too abstract for me to talk about that stuff, but they're worried about liability. Have your buyer sign the offer and send it to the seller's agent with the seller to buyer's agent compensation agreement. You might end up in the seller's agent to buyer's agent compensation agreement, but this is the way you start your deal. Keep it simple. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Think uncoupling and get ahead of the ball. Use the seller's buyer's agent form. This is a little different language from what I've advised in the past. Ryan, you honed in right on it, where we talked about seller's side. I would suggest, as a buying agent making offers, that you start all your offers just assuming that the seller is going to pay the buyer's comp. Tajay can chime in whenever he wants. That's the majority of the deals we see. Tajay, what would you say it is? 75, 90% of all our deals are being sellers paying buyer's agent fees? Or Christian, if you're on?
They were on, Jim.
They were. They're swamped. That's what it's been.
Sorry, I'm here. I was on the phone. What was the question?
Okay. Wouldn't you say just about all our deals are coming in sellers paying buyer's agent fees, not sellers agents paying buyer's agent fees?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the brokerages, their custom forms don't even have the seller's agent's ability to pay the buyer's agent fee. Like I know Caldwell Banker for sure, it's only seller paying it.
And that brings up a good point. We'll talk about all the different forms that are out there, but the agents, brokerages that are really looking down the road are using the forms Tajay described.
Yeah.
They don't even have an option for paying sellers agents, buyers agents by the selling agent.
All right. Well, we get a couple of questions here, Jim, because before we get too far down the road, because Estrella says something. She says, I have been on many webinars regarding the NAR settlement, and the explanation that makes the most sense to me is that NAR lost the lawsuit because the price fixing occurred at the time of the listing. At the listing, the seller's making the decision of the buyer's agent commission as opposed to negotiating at the time of the offer. This will let the seller analyze each offer and how much he will net. There may be buyers paying their agent fees, and others will request it and can be added at the sales price like we've been talking, or any combination they see fit. Again, this allows the seller to negotiate. NAR's new rules removing the compensation from the MLS only protects NAR and its associations, but not the agents, that they are still getting the BA commission at the listing. I believe we should decouple completely. This will eliminate steering and price fixing at the time of listing. Thoughts?
Wow.
I mean,
you've been studying. I think that I think that there's relevance in having discussions with, if you're a listing agent, having discussions with your seller at the time of listing as to paying concessions, buyer's comp or concessions is an important topic. I don't think it should get gutted. I don't think a regulating body or the law should tell sellers. It's like clear cooperation. Sellers should have the ability to sell their property however they want. And we can go into clear cooperation in the future. That's another hot topic.
Agreed, but I'm not saying not to have the conversation with the seller, is to explain, hey, some agents might get paid by their buyers and some agents are going to request it in the offer. So it's giving the seller the opportunity to negotiate at the time of offer. And after hearing all these different people discussing this, it's coming to that we're realizing that the reason we lost the lawsuit was because the seller's opportunity to negotiate was axed at the time of listing when the agent said, hey, you're going to pay the buyer's agent compensation 3%, 2%. And that's why we lost. And that's the only thing that makes sense, because this 6% that they were claiming that we were charging as price fixing, no, it was because now I understand it, that it's at the time of listing where that price fixing came in. And that's why they're saying, oh, the 6% commission is no longer. And they're kind of right, because now if this comes to play the way I believe it will, at the time of listing, we ask for the listing agent's commission and tell him, Mr. Seller, let's see what happens at the time of offer. And this way he gets to negotiate. And buyer's agents out there can't be trying to call and find out what the commissions are or whatever, whether to show or not. And then once everybody, I know this is going to be a learning curve, but once everybody realizes that, hey, that's just the way business is done, just put it in the offer. Don't even call the listing agent to find out.
Oh my
Just
God.
put it in the
Where
offer.
have you been all my life?
Right here.
No, I mean, that's exactly it.
It makes sense though, right? And I think
So-
we're spinning our wheels with all these forms and no, just simplify it, do the listing. We're not going to get in trouble for price fixing, and the agents can't steer, and we negotiate, and the seller negotiated. And if
Ryan,
all
I
his
really like
offers came,
working with you, but I don't know, man. Australia is.
I know. Well, I mean,
hard.
it is. I mean, it's a race. It's really, it's going to be, as you make some great points. I just see it. Yeah, it's a race to the bottom, because you have
Well,
listing
it's a
agents
race
going, hey,
to-
I'll sell you the deal at a 1.5 to list this. I get a direct buyer. We'll negotiate my fees at that time with the, for helping with the buyer. And if we get a buyer's agent, representation with the buyer, then we negotiate at that point too. I mean, I definitely see that coming. What have I seen in practice though? From what I've seen so far, I've seen, most of the listing agents saying, hey, yeah, we're offering, 2.5%. The seller's offering 2.5 or 3%.
but I think we're going to get in trouble with that again.
Yeah,
I think they're going to come after us, because I think that's where the issue happened. I think that's why we lost, because really we weren't price fixing at 6%. The average around the country was like 5.25, and it varies, right? Some people take it at 4, some people take it at 7. That wasn't the price fixing. The price fixing, I believe, was at the time of listing when we asked the seller to commit to an amount to pay the buyer's agent at the time of listing, as opposed to letting it
and I'll go
negotiate.
one step further. Who's the only person cutting a check at the closing table? A buyer.
A buyer.
And who had the commission that the buyer was paying stipulated? The buyer had no
Buyer.
negotiating power in the transaction, but they were cutting the only check. So there's the inherent rub. And there's one thing that the attorneys that were criticizing the lawsuit brought out is it was the easiest lawsuit on the planet to bring, right? So if you're a plaintiff's lawyer, you don't go around suing people for doorknobs that fall off and break your toe because the damages are small and the claims are few. Everybody buys a house. It's a big dollar transaction, and all you had to do to prove your point was sit a bunch of people in a jury box that didn't understand the commission structure. Game over.
And once they saw the listing agreement with that commission already there,
Yeah, but it's even worse than that. Like, people testified they had no idea what they were paying for. It was the easiest lawsuit on the planet. Do I like it? No, but the reality is, if you make your living doing hard things, this was the easiest thing to do with the biggest dollar values attached, with the most people potentially in the damage pool.
Yeah.
In the
So
I-
if this is the case, they're gonna come after us again because
Uh,
we're still doing it in a way, and we're even posting it on social media or websites or whatever. So the attorneys are gonna come back and says, hey, you're still price fixing at the time of the listing, and here's the proof. It's on all these websites, all these social media. So that's my fear, is
Well, I
that NAR
think that-
protected itself, but we're still open game here.
I agree and I disagree. I disagree because there's all these disclosures, and we know majority of people
Yeah.
don't read the agreements, but there is a heightened discussion, and there are the decisions to be made about concessions being paid or not. So there's 3 elections in the listing form, and one of them is no commission at all. And I
Yeah.
would take it one step further, and I would say that the one that says commissions from selling agents to buying agents should be out of there. But here's the one problem I have with the whole thing of saying sellers shouldn't be able to offer concessions or compensation. The biggest problem I have is this. If a seller wants to do anything to sell their house, including giving everybody who comes to tour the house $100, including anybody who clicks on their website, their special website, $25,
I
why
know.
shouldn't they be able to do it? Including
Agreed.
paying a buyer's agent
Yeah.
or paying a buyer. Why
Yeah.
shouldn't they be able to do it? And when we start talking about things like clear cooperation, and I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole, but we'll just do it for a second. Clear cooperation, if a seller doesn't want their property on the MLS, who is a regulating body to tell a seller? I'm going to go out on a limb with you guys, because you guys might have some very different ideas on this. But who is a regulating body or a government to tell a seller, you have to list your property on a public forum if you want to sell it with an agent? It defies logic. We're talking about constraints on trade, and now we're going to impose constraints on trade because a regulator says it's proper. Brian, you've had your hand up for a while. I'm sorry, I have a reduced screen. You're the only one I'm seeing.
No, I appreciate it. To Estrella's point, I mean, while I don't do the single agency agreement, I'm always a transaction broker. It's still in my best interest to help the people get the best deal they can. So if they sign an agreement, whether it's 2%, 3%, whatever, I don't disclose that. My thing is, when people call, I'm going, please submit an offer. They are willing to consider everything, and they will look at all offers and be happy to discuss, period. Because
And
if
you'd be
I put,
amazed how many people you guys see it firsthand. You know, I've done it myself in selling properties. I'll only accept this. And then when the offers don't come in and they finally come in, then I concede and I'm going back.
Exactly. Have that home sit on the market for a month, and the things, the tune changes. I think
Yeah.
you
But-
make up a great point, Brian. It's like you can just tell the buyer's agent, say, hey, put it in your offer. If they like the home, put it in the offer. They might push you
But
harder.
don't put it in the compensation agreement that the parties aren't signing. That's my big point.
exactly, I just put it out there. Hey, you know what? They're excited about this. They'll love to see your offer. If you put it in writing, I'm submitting all offers, and they're considering every single offer individually. And that's what because it's
But Brian, now you've kept yourself out of trouble.
Yeah.
You're doing the same thing every time the same way. And if there's somebody and you're doing it the proper way, and nobody can come back and say, and Australia made this point, nobody can come back and say Brian put his needs ahead of the buyer's needs. Why? Because the buyer signed that offer, and that offer had the compensation that the buyer wanted the seller to pay the buyer's agent in that one form.
I hope everyone understood what Jim just said, because that's a great point. Is that compensation agreement is great, and it allows for acknowledgement. But if it's not put in the contract, you're putting your needs ahead of the buyers. What if the seller decides I'm not paying anything? When does the buyer ever find out that I'm not getting the home that I love because of a compensation agreement that I didn't sign in the first place?
Boom. It goes back to those 2 things we talked about. You guys are going to hate me at some point: privity and uncoupling. But that's where we're headed. And Australia made some great points, but they are based on privity and uncoupling. Now all the same terms are in one document. Very, very, very important. Buyer's initials, buyer initial, and acknowledge any change in the compensation structure right from the start, right? Think about that offer you made where you were asking for sellers financing and the buyer wanted to pay 8% and the seller wanted to pay 10%. If they couldn't come to an agreement, boom, the thing blew up right there. It's the same thing with the compensation. Put it right in the contract. If the buyer wants the seller to pay 3 and the seller's only willing to pay 2, boom, it's in the contract.
We know it.
It's in the buyer's face. We'd all agree if a buyer tenders a 3% and the seller strikes and writes 2%, that's a counteroffer. If it's in paragraph 20, we'd all agree on that. But for some reason, if those negotiations take place in the buyer's comp form and the buyer's not aware of it, there's tons of people who would tell you there's still a contract. No, there's no contract. If you do it in the compensation form, it still blunts the contract. In other words, if your contract does not stipulate an amount and your contract only stipulates that it's contingent on this buyer's comp form and there's negotiation in the buyer's comp form, that actually blunts the contract. But most people would say, no, it doesn't. Because look, you've got a contract with the buyer's signature and the seller's signature. It actually does blunt the contract. So those are problems. Use the new listing agreement with the language that has seller paying seller's agents and sellers paying buyer's agents. We went over that earlier. It's one of the elections, A, B, and C. You don't want to use selling agents paying buying agents. I've harped on that enough. Think uncoupling, it's coming. If the deal does not close, there's no an additional benefit of the language I gave you. If the deal does not close, there's no argument that the buyer owes, that there's no argument for buyer's fees. And I would not call listing agents pre-offer, Australia's point, and having this conversation, is the seller offering buyer's comp or anything like that. This may be perceived as an agent impropriety and the agent putting their needs ahead of the client's. Parting thoughts, real quick. We're at the time limit that I wanted to keep you guys short on. Get the permission of your broker before you do any of these things we've talked about. There are several different proprietary forms agents are using. This makes it really hard, and I've seen some really bad ones. Tajay showed me one yesterday, written by who was the brokerage, Taj? Keller. Was it a Keller office?
I think it was Kai's.
Kai's?
Yeah.
It was the worst. And
then the agent tried to doctor it to make it make as much sense as possible, which made it even worse.
Yeah. Keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple and stupid is the best call here. Just if you stick to the little script we've talked about here, and you don't use these new forms that Florida Association of Realtors put out, we talked about in the last session, you're gonna be good. Be a critical thinker. And think of good example ways to explain this to your client. You're going to make your point much better when you're explaining complicated stuff to your client if you can think of analogous fact patterns, if you can think of things that explain your point better to your client. And if you really like the way we help you guys and you want to make us the title agent in your deals, you can always shift who the title agent is, whether you represent the buyer or not, if you write us in paragraph 20. So when you're putting in your contract language, you can go down to paragraph 20. You can in the title section, you can leave, if you're representing the buyer, you can leave the seller paying for title. And then in paragraph 20, you can write new path title is going to be the closing agent. And so that'll get you and us working together. I can give you more great tips throughout the transaction. If we're your title agent, I'm happy to help you if we're not. This will still put the fees on the seller side, and you'll get, consulting with me and our great staff, and we're available 24/7. We're going above and beyond to help, and I'm happy to do it because it's winning us business and it's keeping the industry sharper and it's keeping us better trained agents. Oh, and the party who chooses title, many people are under the impression that the party who chooses title is by law. Palm Beach County and every county in Florida, the party who chooses title is just by custom. It's not by law. I'd love to know the origin of how that custom arose, if anybody knows it. I still, 40 years in real estate, still don't know how that came up. So that's all I got for you guys today. It's a pleasure. I titled this one, if you look for our outlines, I titled this one Practice Changes Making Offers, and I put today's date on it. We'll do a deep dive on all the new forms coming up soon. If we don't do it in the next one, we'll do it after that. There's a couple of things that we got to really go over with regard to milestone inspections that I think are important, because we're seeing more and more deals derailed on that topic.
No, I mean, they're all supposed to be done. I mean, they didn't change the law on the milestones that they're supposed to be finished by the end of this year, right? I mean, every con.
Well, and then there's also a lot of practical stuff about using the forms and what the association has done and misconceptions that agents are having about what has to be done.
And getting lending, Ryan. I think that's the big piece is, okay, they're done, but will the lender lend after those milestone inspections?
And those
That's
are
what's
all
killing.
conversations you have to have early on. And if you're having those conversations late in the game and the lender, great point, Tajay, and the lender's finding out about this stuff late in the game, wow. Wow. That's a whole nother wrinkle. That's why,
You know, every mortgage broker is like, oh, we can close it, we can close it. I mean, we had 3 deals in September where I kind of knew from the onset the thing wasn't going to happen, and they, you know, switch lenders, and they're not going to lend it until everything
what's the
is.
huge practice tip right there? As a buyer's agent, you have to be making offers on properties that you know the milestone inspection issues up front and the budgeting issues up front. Otherwise, it could boomerang the lender at the end of the deal. And as a selling agent, you have to get that information in the buyer's agent's hands like that. And the buyer's agent has to get it in the hands
And
of the
price it competitively if you know it's going to be an issue. Don't
and
sell
at the
your
listing.
seller on that. Exactly.
At the listing, you have to have those valuable conversations. You guys, if you don't show up next week, I won't blame you.
Wow, Jim. Well, thank you. I mean, this has been some, I mean, condensing all this. Like I said, this is a moving target. It's not easy to nail down, and for Jim to go out on a limb, out here and give his legal expertise, guys, that means a lot. Definitely not seeing this anywhere else. This
My
gives
privilege.
really great info, Jim. Appreciate it. For those who haven't you can check out Jim and get connected with him at his website at newpathtitle.com. You can text him 24/7. He shares his number there. And even if he's not doing the deal, he'll answer your questions. Another time-saving quick thing that can't say enough of is Jim has developed some awesome closing software called Title Leap. It's like a free contract coordinator. So when you do use him, it keeps track of all your drop dead dates. You use this awesome, closing software called Title Leap, and I love it. I miss it when I don't have him, as a closing agent, if I'm representing the buyer on some deals. And then also too, can't say enough good things about the awesome free service he offers for you guys, for agents, is Title Advance. Now, Title Advance, okay, is a free service. So going into a deal, if you're getting a listing or you're representing a buyer and you want to know if there's any kind of title issues on this deal that might hold it up, or if it's too skinny, it might not close, raise your hand if that's happened to you before. We've got a listing and you're getting excited to sell it and the deal didn't close because the deal was too skinny. I've had that happen. You avoid all those frustrations by getting a Title Advance up front, so you know what's happening on the deal. So can't say enough good things about Title Advance, Jim.
And RealTrade, home of the double dip. Brian, how many users are you up to?
Well, we're close. We're almost at 3,000 agents now actively using on it. We got thousands of buyers or sellers. We got hundreds of awesome service providers like you, Jim, on it. So I tell all the agents, create a profile. It's free. You get direct leads right off your listings. They can discover you not only on the social aspect of RealTrade, the search pros aspect of RealTrade, and it's free. One big thing that we're going to be doing to bring in new buyers and agents, Jim, to RealTrade, I kind of want to release this now, let everybody else. We're now going to allow the buyers and sellers to comment and ask questions directly on the listings. No other platform answers that. So if they have a question like, how big is the master, the master bedroom, or how deep is the swimming pool, they can ask questions. And we're going to start advertising for that. So we're going to be bringing more buyers and sellers. Of course, the listing agents are going to have to prove, and they're the only ones that are going to answer that. But that's pretty exciting. So we're doing more development to bring more buyers and sellers because we got thousands, but we want millions of buyers.
Ryan, and here's the proof right now, right? Last time we met as a group, you told me you had 2,700 and change. Now you're at 3,000.
Yeah, we're adding a lot of agents per week. Yeah.
2 weeks. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, it's just, the thing is, it's like, hey, why not create a free profile? If you get one lead from RealTrade and you created a nice profile and it took you 15 minutes, you make an extra $10,000 and I get that phone call from you, that warms my heart, right? Because we're taking the powers back, giving it back to the agents. We don't want these third-party companies like Zillow using our data, right, against us and making us bid against each other. We're trying to solve this problem.
That's the platform of the future.
Yeah, no, we make money through the social aspect by awesome service providers like Jim, like Jeff that are on this call that you can get connected with, help facilitate your business, make you more efficient. We got inspectors, appraisers, contractors, handymans.
Yeah, most importantly, Ryan, who shouldn't be paying for the platform? Who should not ever pay for the platform?
No, the agents. I agree.
The listing agent, the buying agents.
Yeah.
It's a crime.
Yeah. So if they do too, I want to let you know too that the buyers do need a buyer's agent. They can search them out on RealTrade too. So, I mean, my point is we're trying to solve the problems the best they can, make it as fair as we can. And we're coming from a real estate agent perspective because I'm a real estate agent. But I can't say enough good things about Jim, guys. Title Advanced, use that. It's a free tool. I use it on every single deal now, even if it's my listing or if I'm, representing the buyer. I want to know going in, like if there's any title issues, what's happening.
You can order your title advances right on newpathtitle.com. You just come down here to Title Advance or 24/7 realtor support. I don't know of any title agents that go out and do as much as we do for agents, but I believe wholeheartedly in what we do, and I walk it like I talk it. We also have another product called TO Capital. If you guys need hard money, Tajay is a genius at structuring creative finance deals. You can call us all the time, and even if we're not the closing agent, we'll figure out how to get it structured, or if you need outside money, we can fund it. And Ryan mentioned Title Advance, and it's with full passion and sincerity that I tell you guys it's a pleasure serving.
Thanks, Jim. I know you're putting us out on a limb, and it's been a scary process with all these changes, but you holding our hand here and walking us through this, it's been invaluable, Jim. Can't thank you enough.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome.
All right, you guys.
Good luck out there. Happy selling, everybody. Let's do it.